what are we talking about? There is this bitternut tree that Jack and I have worked on a number of times. It is a fantastic tree. Let me show you. Well, firstly, we are going over a couple things here. Generally speaking, we are very interested in tree stability. I think knowing about tree stability or thinking about tree stability is one of the ways that you can actually like preserve trees. If you if you understand a little bit more about how they actually stand up and how trees can often stand up despite looking kind of gnarly, learning about why that is how you can give people good advice on if their tree actually should or should not come down. In this video, we're going to get a little technical, not too much, but we're going to be talking about sonic tomography and resistance drilling and stability models, how they all combine into assessing a tree's stability. But more specifically, we're going to look at a particular case of a bitternut tree that I recently got puzzled with, that one of my mentors helped me out with. That I needed this lesson at this time. I was getting really I was getting kind of dreary. I was getting caught up in the dreariness of like getting into winter, and like this just sort of was like a nice shaking that I needed. Remember that trees can be hollow and healthy. Parts of a tree can be dysfunctional while other parts can be functional. And the stuff that we're about to describe is not a way to check on a tree's health. This is well within the risk domain. I encourage all arborists to have at least some familiarity with tree stability and how it is assessed, because if you're someone who talks to people about their trees at all, they sort of have an assumption that you know about tree stability. They ask you, I know this is oversimplifying, but they ask you oftentimes, is my tree going to fall down? Is my tree stable? So the public assumes that you actually have some knowledge about this stuff. So you should. The public expects that, and you are going to be called upon to weigh in on that. And so you should know about these things. I'm not necessarily saying that you have to buy all these fancy toys, but I am sort of saying that if you can identify if a tree needs to come down, you should also be able to identify when a tree does not. And assessing a tree is a way to achieve that. Check this thing out. Look at this beaut. This is a hickory. This is a bitternut hickory. Caria cordiformis. This thing's massive. Perfectly shaped. Actually, we have reduced this upper area a little bit. In the past, we did some drilling up here on some cavities, so we reduced the maximum height of this whole structure, beginning from this point on, and also did some other choice and weight reductions above the roof and stuff. So we have worked on this tree before. Clearly, this thing is maybe 4 feet at most from the house, so its stability is something that's worth thinking about. This tree is quite healthy. There's very little dead stems in the crown when we first got to it. Not all it hasn't been lion-tailed. It hasn't just been like gutted. To be honest, they haven't really done much with this tree, and I think that is a good thing in this case. Over the summer, the clients told me that a mushroom popped out over here out of the base of the tree, pretty much right at the soil line. This was all that was left of the mushroom when I saw it. I put some potassium hydroxide on it, and the fluid turned black from clear. And this suggests that this species belongs to the Ganoderma genus. I think due to like the mahogany color and kind of like how rigid it was, I think this was Ganoderma sessile. The nature of this species of Ganoderma draws our attention more to the root plate and a little bit less of the trunk itself. This is just to say that I would have rather have first done an uprooting analysis. which uses a totally different set of tools. But it's quite difficult to scan a root plate given that everything is underground, right? And so we would have to like do a huge RCX on this tree, which adds cost, which adds steps in the whole process. So that wasn't done. So with all of these limitations disclosed to the client, we got to it. We did a stem breakage analysis at this region of the tree. What we're looking at here on the left is the tomogram or sonogram. I'll probably use those interchangeably. They mean the same thing. Here is the sonogram that we took at ground level. Here is where it sort of fits in and orients into the tree itself. Tomography scans are commonly thought of as like an image of the decay inside of a tree, and sometimes it can represent that. But what this actually is an image of how sound travels through the stem. And generally speaking, wood that is solid will allow sound to pass through it more quickly, showing a higher velocity. So in this image, the outer shell, all this dark black and brown, suggests that this wood is solid. And up here you can see this sound spectrum. This is 100% velocity. This is the lowest recorded at 54% velocity in the blue. So this is at the other end of the spectrum. This image would suggest that this middle part, the sound is moving more slowly. The pink is a little bit faster than that, and the green is a little bit faster than that. This image could easily represent what the inside of a tree could look like. We have probably all removed trees that have a cross-section that look kind of like this. But this is not an image of the decay. This is an image of the sound, and this is a very important distinction that will be relevant. Sometimes decay or hollowing will cause images similar to this. And at first glance, that is exactly what I thought this was. Sometimes there are things inside of these trees that will cause the sound to move more slowly, but that is not decay and not hollowing. I've done a lot of these trees that I did not have any spidey senses about that have some degree of internal hollowing. But those trees had indicators on their exteriors that would suggest that. Weird bulges, weird seams, old wounds. There was things that sort of like drew my attention to it. And on this particular tree, there weren't any. It was just that mushroom that sort of keyed us in on, hey, what's over here? That's to say that trees are good at hiding internal dysfunction when it is present sometimes. But there's also an assumption that you should make that this is a good thing, and that with all big old trees, you can expect some degree of internal hollowing or internal dysfunction. That is an inseparable part of how trees age, and it's normal. But one problem related to this is that anytime there's like a major storm and a tree that is hollow breaks, and everyone in the neighborhood sort of pays attention to this, and they all get kind of spooked. Well, what if my tree is hollow? What if my tree falls and crushes someone or kills someone? Most of the trees in established wooded neighborhoods have bases that could look like this one. So this is an example of something called the survivorship bias, that while people see the one hollow stem that broke, they don't see all of the other hollow stems that did not break. So let's first look at this sonogram. Got some explaining to do. This is at ground level. And we chose this because that's where the Ganoderma was emerging from, and we had no other features to go on. So that's where we did it. Point 1 faces north, and we go counterclockwise. You should evenly space your sensors approximately, but you notice there's this huge gap between points 5 and 6. This is because as I was putting the nails into the tree, these nails would sink straight into the wood all the way with one strike. And if you've ever cut into hickory, or if you've ever, nailed into hickory, you would know that it's quite hard. It's abnormal for it to be so easy to nail into it. With this tool, we're taught to not put nails directly into areas of known decay. This is probably just like an acoustic consistency thing where you should put all of the nails into solid wood or all of the nails into decayed wood, not both. So the reason that points 5 and 6 are, they look so straight, the stem itself is not straight. The distance between here from point 5 to 6 was 68 centimeters until I found good normal wood again. So that's why those are so far apart. This space represents about 20% of the basal circumference of the tree. The space between points 5 and 6, I did a little bit of digging on like with a chisel and a hammer on like why is this so soft, and I found like a pretty thin layer of white rot in this circumference. And actually, I didn't find it any higher than ground level. It was all lower. This, I believe, is the Ganoderma's work. And again, we're going to get back to that later. Worth noting, because this shows up in a different place of this assessment. You know, when you're trying to determine the likelihood of a trunk breaking, the sonogram itself doesn't just give you answers. Once you do a scan, it doesn't just say like good or bad. There are things that you have to do with this information now. Now that we have our image of the cross section, what do you then do then? Because we know that plenty of trees are hollow and are standing and are fine and are hollow for centuries. So why do we take scans in the first place? What do we do with them? The answer to that is that we put them into a stability model. There's a number of different ones out there. I use 2 of them. One is called Adbian. The other is called TreeCalc. You don't just need a tomography scan or resistance drills or a LiDAR scan. You also are recording things about the tree like its exposure, its crown shape, the north-south spread, the east-west spread, how high up from the ground does the crown begin. There's a whole bunch of different variables that you're also plugging into these models. And these models are based on physics and biomechanics. I'm not going to sit here and say like I understand them to the nth degree, but it's good to have like some familiarity with where the math is coming from, I guess. Oh wait, I forgot to say something. This yellow line here. This is something very important to this entire assessment. This is a crack. And it was especially odd to see this because on the outside of the tree, there were no indicators of a crack. There was no seam. Sometimes if we're doing a scan where we know that 2 stems are included, we can kind of expect to see a sort of like crack-like feature to show up in the tomogram. But there was nothing on the exterior that suggested that this would be there. And so sometimes I have seen cracks form when the interior is really decayed but not hollow. If it's really soft, sometimes those 2 cracks can just form in the decay and not in the normal wood. And so that happens. So I didn't really think much of this at first when I originally saw it. But then when I cranked up the crack sensitivity detection thing, this crack really kind of like flushed out and became kind of big. And this is where we start to scratch our head. I will often just check the data before I take everything off the tree because it takes so long to set up. And there was something kind of weird about this sonogram to me on site. I didn't have the time to kind of mess around with stuff just yet, but I had a feeling that something wasn't right. And I had a resistance drill with me, and I chose to do some drilling. I drilled, I'm going to show you here, I drilled about 40 centimeters into the stem like this. I drilled about 40 centimeters into the stem like this and like this. Sometimes when a tree is in a position where you can't put all of the sensors around the tree because the tree is grown into a fence, it's growing against a wall. To get a good image, you have to have sensors around the circumference of the stem. And sometimes you can't do that. So what we've done in the past were when we're trying to just get an image to use in a stability assessment, sometimes we will take a number of different resistance drills around the circumference of the stem at the same plane and sort of like kind of piece them together. We orient them around the shape of the cross-section, and you can sort of connect the dots. And this is a way you can get like a rudimentary image of a stem so that you can do your stem, so that you can put it into the stability software later on. Yeah, so anyway, I did the resistance drills, and here is what they looked like. This is the resistance drill carried out here. So this is the area where I found that white rot. Right in this space, do you see how the resistance, firstly, it's kind of low when you go into the bark. That's pretty normal. But then it sort of stays kind of low. There's a sharp spike. And then I think we enter into more normal wood. So I think this thin area of white rot is only in the first 4 centimeters of that space. Deeper than that is normal. I don't know how big the sapwood is on this tree, how many rings it contains, but might be a little bit deeper than this. So hopefully there's not total sapwood dysfunction here, but that remains to be seen. That is not known. But what's most interesting about this, check it out. Resistance drills will show an amplitude. This is like the resistance. Healthy wood resists higher than softer wood. What's happening is a resistance drill is like a needle or a drill bit that's really long and skinny, and it drills in, and it is measuring the resistance. This blue curve represents how hard the drill bit or the needle is pushing, or the penetration resistance. And this green curve represents rotational resistance, how hard the needle is working to spin. Generally, they do align pretty well. Sometimes you'll see them sort of misalign. I won't get into that here, but this can indicate, well, maybe I will get into that here. This can indicate when there's very low penetration resistance and high, or there's some rotational resistance. This can indicate that it's not totally, that the needle isn't entering into a void or a hollow. It indicates that it could be entering into an area that is like of soft decay. It's really kind of spongy. You've probably felt this before, where, like you could spin, there's some spinning resistance, but the needle is just kind of like going through easily. But that's around the 33 centimeter mark. Well, that's weird though, isn't it? Because according to the sonogram, we should be seeing some change around 10 centimeters, 11. We go deeper, and then around 18, we enter into the blue. So you'd think around 18, we would see that sort of drop off of that curve, but we don't. We see it at 33. Well, let's look at another one. This one was taken here. And it goes about this deep. All right, so perhaps around the 31 centimeter mark, we'll see it drop off, right? But we don't. This big spike, I slipped while I was doing the drilling, so ignore that. But you'll see, just like the previous one, the resistance is kind of low at the start, and it increases the further in you go. This also is partially due to, as you're going through all this solid wood, the entire shaft of the needle is getting some friction as it spins. This looks like normal wood to me. And then we'll look at the last one. Now, this one drops off again around the 34, 33 centimeter mark. This one was taken from 0.9 towards the center. Always drilled towards the center. Goes about this deep. So I would think around, I don't know, maybe 22 to 30 centimeters, we should see some funk pop up on this drill. Instead, we see it at 34, where it drops off. This is all of the resistance drills. We'll call it 1, 2, and 3. This is all the resistance drills placed on top of the tomogram. And this is where the anomaly really stands out. So if I zoom in, this is number 1. This blue, remember, represents slow sonic velocity. So this could indicate some decay, but these resistance drills don't suggest that at all, do they? These resistance drills suggest that there is some dysfunction likely at 34 centimeters deep. Not around this mark, or this, or this. There is this little bit of softness here where that white rod is. We'll go to number 3 here. And again, you would expect the drop to be closer to somewhere over here, but it's deeper. And in number 2, you'd think it would drop around 28 centimeters, but it doesn't. It stays solid. So this is the puzzle. This is where when I put all of this stuff together and finally was like, all right, hang on. This doesn't make sense. It's normal to have a little bit of variation. If this was off by a centimeter or 2, I think the tomography could be forgiven for that, right? But this is a drastic difference in how I think the image should look. So once I've hit this point in my process of assessing this, I can't even get to the stability model yet because my image of the cross-section I want to test, I don't have confidence in it. I don't know what to believe here. But I mentioned something earlier. You probably have already guessed what it is. That crack. That crack. We're going to look back at the sonogram for a second. And we are going to put the crack sensitivity way up. So if you suspect that there is a meaningful crack in your tomogram, you can run the PICUS software using select measuring points that do not contain the crack. Let me show you. So you can turn off and on different sensors. So if we're looking at this huge crack pretty much down the middle, let's look at sensors 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we'll shut off 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. So when we disable all of these sensors and run the software with the shape that excludes that crack, all of this appears to be of high velocity. Now let's do it again on the other hemisphere of 11 through 6, again, not including that crack. And again, this appears to be solid. So we can do this in a number of ways where we can sort of create little slices of the image that all appear solid. But every time you include this area that you suspect the crack to be in, the sound starts to slow down and get kind of weird. Let me just include 12 here really quick and I'll show you what I mean. Look, as soon as you add 12 in, it gets kind of funky. So what I've done now is I've taken all of the little slices that I could that produced a solid image, and I slid them over the tomogram. And if I adjust the transparency, you can see the fact that these are all solid can sort of confirm the presence of this crack. It's important that we identify that this crack is here, or if this crack is here or not, because that can explain why when we do these little hemispheres, they're solid, and it can explain why the resistance drills are solid for the most part. And this crack being here will fundamentally alter the shape of the cross-section that we use in the stability model. As I slide this slider around, you can see that I suspect these areas are actually solid as this image suggests. So Making those invisible for a second, what I did next was, I think I mentioned that sort of connect the dots strategy I've done before. I did that in this case, where I sort of connected these 2 points along an arc and mirrored it across itself, and I got this shape. I believe that my cross-section actually looks a little bit more like this. Another way that we would confirm if this crack is actually there or not is by returning to the tree and trying to drill in such a way that we cross the path of the crack. If we did that, the resistance drill would likely show a drop in amplitude when the needle enters into the crack, and it would come back up when it exited the crack and went back into the wood. So we'd be able to see that. But I think that the tomography method of slicing it up does confirm that there is likely a crack there. This crack is not a structural concern. When a tree bends in the wind, the outermost wood fibers will take all of that, or most of that strain and stress, and like that's where most of the tension and compression is. The center of the stem doesn't move all that much. I don't believe that there's 2 different pieces like moving independently inside of this tree. The shell wall is totally intact. And as the physics of pipes dictate, a cylinder that is hollow with a solid shell wall is quite stable. So now that we have what we believe to be a more precise shape than what the tomography suggested, we can then start looking at the next step, which is going into the stability models and seeing how things fare. All right, at this point, we got to talk about safety factors. Safety factors are a value that all these stability softwares use. I'm going to read you something that TreeCalc wrote. It's translated from German, so it's kind of, the sentence structure is kind of weird sometimes. But then I'm going to try to like rephrase that myself. I'll show it up here on screen. The safety factor denotes how much higher the breaking point of a tree actually is than what it is supposed to be, according to a theoretical calculation based on wind load analysis and statics. The safety factor can be defined as the permissible load divided by the expected maximum load. So a safety factor of 1 means that the tree has no safety reserves whatsoever on which it can draw. Analyses carried out using tree statics usually employ a safety factor of 1.5. This comparatively low safety margin is only sufficient because trees, unlike technical structures like buildings, can maintain or even increase their load-bearing reserves via annual growth increments over a long period of time. The length of time for which damage done by wood colonizing fungus can be compensated, which is part of the biological assessment of the tree. So in my own words, the safety factor is essentially, it's a number used to communicate how many more times the tree can withstand its current load in its current environmental conditions in its current state. So a number greater than 1 represents how many more times the tree should be able to tolerate those things. This is what TreeCalc calls reserves. And this is an approximation. This number that we get is theoretical. It's based on physics and math, and it's all theoretical on structures, and these are organic things, so they're not perfect. They're not predictable structures with predictable values, or as predictable of values as like steel is. And there have been times where I've disagreed with the safety factor that I've gotten from these analyses. They're one thing to think about among others, but it's just an easy kind of way to summarize a lot of things. And I like that they emphasize that the tree's safety factor can improve. And this can happen naturally, or it can happen with the helping hand of arborists. If you can reduce the end weight, if you bring the center of mass in or down, you can improve the safety factor. And sometimes trees break, but sometimes after they've broken, they become more stable. which kind of goes against some of the tree dogma in the industry here. This is also to say that sometimes if you prune wrong, you can decrease the safety factor too. I don't think most like conventional tree literature emphasizes or even explains the necessity of knowing how to assess these things. Sometimes the safety factor is expressed as 1.5 or some like 1 point or 2 points, some decimal like that. Other times it's expressed as like a percentage. So 1.5 would be 150%. I use two different softwares. I use one called Adbian and another called TreeCalc. And I do this just for like consistency's sake. It's good to see if your data aligns and if their methodologies are similar. This is the safety factor value of the original tomogram that you can see here, sort of pixely there. But if we were to assume that that one was accurate, the safety factor that we got with the most decomposition, generally I look at this one because it errs on the side of caution. That's the lowest value. We get a safety factor of 243%, which is above the minimum threshold of 150%. So even if this image was accurate of representing the cross-section, the tree would still be quite stable and not very likely to break at that point under normal conditions. Gotta always say that. Next, let's look at the safety factor from TreeCalc. I used this, all of the inputs were the same on both of these. And with TreeCalc's calculations, we had a safety factor of 2.76 or 276%, which is pretty close to Adbian's 243. So this is a good indicator of consistency. And again, this is just assuming that this cross-section is accurate. So just for curiosity's sake, I then, remember this area between 5 and 6 that's kind of soft? I sort of imagined, what if the cross-section looked like this? What if this region was gone and all white rotted, let's say, all the way in, and the cross-section was like the C shape? I did the TreeCalc analysis for that, and it looks like this. I will usually adjust the bending load axis and the alignment of the opening to get the lowest value I can. Again, I'm kind of just erring on the side of caution. And we get a value of 1.25. It's pretty low. This cross-section is about how much dysfunction was on this circumference, on this side, right here. This is a really good point to say that when you have an open cross-section, the stability can be significantly worse than if it is a closed cross-section. Another way to say that is that this emphasizes the importance of having a completely closed shell wall. Once the shell wall opens, and based on how wide it is, obviously, that can drastically influence the safety factor of the stem. And in this case, TreeCalc is recommending a height reduction of about 15% if this were the accurate shape. I don't think that it is, but yeah, just wanted to see and point to how important a closed cross-section can be. Here is the TreeCalc safety factor of this cross-section, the one that I think is actually the most accurate. And we have a safety factor of 4.78 or 478%. This is like 3 times higher than the minimum threshold of 150 and is almost twice the value of this one. It's 200% higher, which is crazy, which is way more stable. Both were above the minimum, but in either case, I would not have advised on doing any reductive pruning to reduce the likelihood of the stem breaking at this height. But just because we got a good safety factor value doesn't mean that the tree is infallible forever. every time we do a stability analysis, just like any risk analysis, you put a time frame on that beyond which your assessment is not valid. You can't reasonably predict for an indefinite future. So I usually will put between like 2 and 4 years on these types of assessments based on stuff. I also include the explanation in my reports that this assessment is limited to the things we assessed. This assessment has nothing to do with like if a big branch breaks on the house, right? Like I didn't look at any of that. So I also explain those things in the report as well. I know this has kind of gone on for a while, but man, I needed this lesson. You know, thinking about tree stability is part of keeping trees around. It's not just like, you know, pruning and killing and anything. Like you have to have good perspective on tree stability to inform if you're keeping trees or not. And like I said at the start of this video, the public sort of expects you to have some notion of how to assess tree stability. If you're telling someone that their tree needs to come down, why? Or if you're telling them that you think it is stable, why? How can you prove these kinds of things? How can you support your statements of stability? What I've demonstrated here is one way. You got to organize your data and put it all into a report, but that might be a video for another time. You know, I've done maybe like 40 or 50 like, you know, in-depth analyses on trees, and I think that this is my actual first false positive, or at least I would hope that is the case. It certainly makes me wonder if I've missed anything in the past, though. Here's a good place to say also that like these tools aren't just magic genies that give you answers. You still have to do something when you have that data. A lot of people will talk about like doing tomography or doing resistance drilling, but if that's not part of a bigger process on their own, those things don't mean anything. A tomography image on its own, it means nothing. But you don't need all these fancy tools to use these models that I've shown you. You don't need to have fancy tools to like improve your understanding about tree stability either. Having them make sure analysis is a little bit more precise, sure, but not every tree needs this degree of precision, you know? There's plenty of trees that lack features of concern, and there's plenty of trees where you can do an assessment where you don't even need to do any tomography or resistance drilling to make a good judgment call. And yeah, these assessments aren't just about determining if a tree is hollow or not. It isn't so binary. These assessments are used to help clients make informed decisions about trees and whether they should keep them or not, and using data to support whatever rationale you have. I'm not talking about saving trees in like this corny fairy tale way. I'm talking about like how do you actually do it? Yeah, this is one avenue by which you actually save and preserve trees. This is just part of the bigger picture of taking care of trees. Yeah, I think that's all. If you couldn't tell, I was excited about this. I was jazzed up to have a new puzzle. And yeah, I feel like I've improved with this particular analysis. Hope you found this interesting. Again, even if you don't do this kind of thing, at least maybe now you know a little bit more about like how it actually looks. I have to go to bed. I'm editing right now, and I've realized that I have left out part of the story. The Ganoderma. That section, if you recall on the sonogram between points 5 and 6, we're going to be monitoring that. I didn't go into all the details about how we were going to do that, but when I was editing this video, it sort of seemed like I just kind of left that point and forgot about it. I didn't include it in this video because that would make this already long video much longer. But yeah, I didn't forget about it, and maybe I'll include a little blurb down below. I want to give a special thank you to one of my mentors, Philip Van Wassenaar. He is retiring soon. A well-earned retirement. And yeah, I want to thank you for helping me through this last little puzzle here. And thank you for your career well spent. You know, not many arborists can say that they have helped shape the way that other arborists assess tree stability. And I think you are a great example of how to spend your career serving trees. And yeah, just on behalf of the entire Tree First team, thank you so much. and enjoy your retirement, and we will not let you down.